Okay, so that leads me to talk about possibly a client who's had their billing guidelines in place for a while, maybe years, who knows. What advice do you have, or talk to us about updating billing guidelines and maybe how often to do that or why?
Yeah, absolutely. So, a lot of our clients update their billing guidelines every year or two. I would think that, keeping it in that time frame is probably, going to be able to keep you up to industry standards as much as possible. I think it's important to update your guidelines because obviously the industry changes all the time. So if, the current industry standard is for, word processing charges to be allowed and you're not allowing them, or vice versa, then again, that's, savings that could be realized by not allowing those charges, by putting that in your billing guidelines and then, following through with that and marking those charges down when they should be.
Right. And that leads me to think too, how important it is to communicate with your firms when you are updating your guidelines.
Absolutely.
And how there really should be a time frame, maybe. I mean, what do you think about that? Like a time frame, we've updated it, we're going live with the new updates. How do you kind of think about handling that?
Yeah, so most of our clients have the fiscal year is the same as the calendar year. Now, of course, that's not to say all of our clients are. We do have some clients whose fiscal year starts, one of them starts in September, which I just got off the phone with them actually. So they're fresh in my mind. But, I'd say if your fiscal year starts January 1, then, have your client billing guideline, your firm billing guidelines updated and release them out to your firms. I would say no later than November 1st of the year prior. That way you can send those out, talk to anybody you might need to from the firm to talk about negotiations or, those exceptions that we keep talking about or what have you. That way when January 1 comes around, everybody is ready to go. There's, no backlog of invoices that haven't been actioned with, the unupdated billing guidelines and
Right.
Things like that.
Right. And I know that sounds, cumbersome and kind of like a pain, but that's another thing that Mosaic does handle for clients too, is that we let the communications come through us and we talk the firms through the billing guidelines, which is good because it saves the burden on the client as well. So I don't think people realize that often.
Well, and another point to that, Tammy, is that when we are going through this, when we send out the notifications and we request that they acknowledge the receipt of the email of the updated guidelines, we keep a record of that. So that way, if the client comes to us and they said, this firm is still billing for this, this, and this, it was in our guidelines, did they ever respond? Did they ever acknowledge that we were updating? We then have a record and we can say, yes, on this date, this person acknowledged, and, signed it, all of that stuff. So, we do keep track of those things, and it's very important to make sure that you're holding your firms accountable.
Right. And then you have a way to do so, which is important as well.
Absolutely.
So I wanted to talk also about maybe what you think should be included or shouldn't be included in the billing guidelines.
Well, it really does depend on, it's company by company. However, there are some things that are pretty universal, those industry standards that we've been talking about, as far as travel, what will your company pay and what will they not pay? Will they pay 50% of travel or 100% only if they're working on your cases during their travel? Do they reimburse for, those copying charges that we discussed? That's one of those things where a lot of our clients are kind of hit or miss on. I think it's really interesting to see that some of our clients, they will pay the copy charges and others are just strict no way. So, I would also say that rate increases, if your firms do rate increases, yearly or every other year, pardon me, those things should also be in the guidelines stating when you'll allow those increases. So let's go back to that January 1 timeline. If your firms know that their new guidelines start January 1, and that is also when their new rates need to be in, they'll know ahead of time that they need to get that submitted so that they can be actioned properly going forward. And then, I would also say a really big piece to this would be receipts and supporting documentation for any expenses or disbursements that the firm has that they're passing on to the company to reimburse for. There are clients that still don't require documentation, and it's really difficult to justify those charges if there's no backup. So that's becoming more and more recognized and mandatory, I would say, across our client base.
I think that's so important because I think those are two places where firms really need to be very or clients rather. I always keep saying firms, I don't know why. Where clients need to be really thoughtful about how they put out their travel policy and how they put out their documentation policy, because there's there's really some spaces to lose money in there. And I think requiring supporting documentation is really important. And it does save people a lot of money.
Well, and it also saves a lot of administrative back and forth.
Right.
I mean, if I submit an invoice to client XYZ and it has a $500 expense and I provide my documentation and it is clearly stated what the expense was, and, that's more likely to get approved as opposed to submitting an invoice to company ABC with my same $500 expense with no documentation. That's probably not going to fly as well as if I just
what is this for?
Yeah, exactly.
What is this? You can't have that.
But also along with that, Tammy, again, we have those exceptions. So let me just quickly take a minute here. When Mosaic does the billing guideline review service, we create an exceptions document. And on that document, it tells us what the exception is, which firm it is for, or which firms, who gave us the authority to provide that exception. So, which person at the company, not the firm. And then we also make note to if it was a phone call that we got the exception on, or an email, and the date of that. That way we have that also as backup in case a new company person comes in and says, why is this exception being allowed? We can reference that. Exceptions are really important because, there's an exception, to every rule, and that does not exclude legal, obviously. So
no, it does not.
Yes. So, there's a lot of firms that have exceptions for, court fees that they allow that maybe others don't. That's one of the things that I just talked to my other client about, was that some firms they're allowing some firms to charge court fees, the expense code E112 court fees, whereas they're not allowing others, and they're not requiring supporting documentation on those for specific firms, but whereas others, they will require that. So that's one of those exceptions things. And it's just something that they worked out when they, were brought in to assist on the matters that they're working on.
Right. Well, it's just, it's a conversation, and that's what it should be. And everything gets worked out, and that's what they're there for.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you so much for that.
You're welcome. And I hope this gives you and everybody else a little bit of insight and understanding into what outside counsel billing guidelines are and their importance. Mosaic as a whole, we're really, really proud to have helped and assisted a lot of our former clients as well as current clients with overhauling their guidelines. It's a really important thing to make sure that they're up to industry standard like we spoke about, and this leads to not only saving money, but time. And of course, more importantly, it works out so that the client and the firm really foster that relationship. And we step in and we make sure that that relationship is secure the best that we can by working with them and working with the client. Overall, billing guidelines are something that I think every client should make sure that they have, that are strong language, clear, precise guidelines that they can provide to their clients. Their firms.
Right. See, you did it too.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that, Michelle. And anybody who's watching or listening, please feel free to reach out to any of us at Mosaic with any matter management. See, there we go. I can't even talk. Matter management or e-billing questions that you may have. Our website is www.mosaic.com. mosaiclegalops.com. And Michelle and I are always available for any questions. So thank you, Michelle.
Thanks, Tammy.